All right, well, here I am with my friend Ben Azadi, New York Times best-selling author, and he's got his new book now, Keto Flex. Go to ketoflexbook.com. We're going to talk about the 4 secrets to reduce inflammation, burn fat, and reboot your metabolism. So you guys are in for a treat. Ben, always great to connect with you.
Always an honor to come back and collaborate with you, David. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about this, ketosis and the ketogenic diet. Big buzzword. Lots of people have heard it. A lot of people will say, well, I tried keto, right? It worked for me or it didn't work for me, right? And a lot of people just think that keto or ketosis is a diet, right? But let's do a deep dive on this. What is keto?
Well, I mean, if you're watching this video on if you're watching this interview on video, you could see behind David is his book, The Keto Metabolic Breakthrough, and that's exactly what it is. Ketosis is a metabolic process, not a diet. That separates it from other diets out there, like a vegan diet or a paleo diet or even a carnivore diet. This is different. This is a metabolic process, and there's nothing new about it. It's maybe nuanced or new to some people, but this metabolic process has been around for as long as humans have existed. And I know that because our ancestors did not have food readily available to them. They had to fast. And you know this, David, when you fast, your body produces ketones. And I also know that our ancestors did not have carbohydrates available all year round. It was seasonal availability for carbohydrates. So they also ate higher protein and higher fat, lower carbs. So they did keto without knowing they were doing keto. Now, fast forward to this day and age that we live in, we're in a keto deficiency. 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, according to the research. That's 93 out of 100 people. They have some form of insulin resistance, metabolic dysfunction. I call them in Keto Flex, they're in a keto deficiency. They've simply forgot how to burn fat. So by switching that metabolism from a sugar-burning metabolism, which is 93% of Americans, to a fat-burning metabolism, that is ketosis. And the hormone that unlocks that, as you discussed so brilliantly in your videos, David, is insulin. And we need to lower insulin to unlock this stored fuel we have sitting on our body. And what's really fascinating is that we have people that are overweight. We have people that are obese. Harvard is saying that in just the next 5 or 6 years, they're estimating that about 50% of the entire population in the US will be classified as obese, not just overweight, but obese. So these individuals, they have all this fat on their body, the fat around their organs, the visceral fat, yet they can't access it because their metabolism is burning sugar from the food they eat, the carbohydrates, and they have all the fuel, they can't access it, which is wild. So insulin is the key switch to get access to the stored fat. And that's what ketosis is. When you're in ketosis, your body has lowered insulin because you've lowered glucose, and we'll talk about how to do that. And now your body starts accessing stored fat for fuel. Those fatty acids are broken down, shuttled to your liver. Your liver uses it as a fuel source, and then your liver produces ketones, and those ketones fuel the brain, your heart, your muscle, your mitochondria. And that's what ketosis is. It's such a powerful tool when it's used the right way.
Yeah, what a great explanation. And there's a lot of people out there that are tracking their ketones, right? Maybe they're using urine strips or blood ketones and almost playing a game with it, like who can get the most ketones. Should that be the goal here when it comes to getting into ketosis? Should it be like who can get their ketones the highest?
No, because just like you don't want to have the highest glucose, you don't necessarily want to shoot for the highest ketones. Here's why. To your point, David, there are 3 ways to test ketones because there are 3 primary ketone bodies. There's beta hydroxybutyrate, which is considered the gold standard. That's the one that crosses the blood-brain barrier. That you test that one with blood, like a finger prick. Then you have acetone that you test with breath meters. And then the urine strips, as you mentioned, are acetoacetate. A lot of people, they use the urine strips because they're cheaper. You go on Amazon, buy a few strips, and it's not a lot of money. However, the urine strips are not going to be the most accurate, especially as you're more of a seasoned vet, meaning weeks and months into ketosis. They might be a little accurate in the beginning, but once your cells are familiar with using ketones, it's not going to really spill out in the urine. It can give you a false negative or a false lower amount. So in general, I'm not a fan of the urine strips. Breath meters, kind of be hit or miss. There's some good ones out there, but they're not the best measurement for ketones. It's going to be blood, and that's going to look at beta hydroxybutyrate. And once, on that blood meter, once it registers 0.5 millimoles per liter, which is what it's going to show you, you're officially burning fat during ketosis. So that's the starting point of ketosis. Now, should you get higher? Is higher better? That was the question. Not necessarily. That's not the goal, because if you have higher ketones, it could actually show that you're not actually using those ketones efficiently. And as you get more fat adapted, and then eventually keto adapted, which means now your mitochondria are so efficient at using ketones, you're actually going to see those ketones drop when you measure it. And most people think, oh, that's not good. I need to raise my ketones. No, that's actually a really good thing, because your body is getting familiar with using those ketones. So the sweet spot for me is somewhere between 0.8 and around 2.0 ketones in terms of the blood meter for millimoles per liter. Now, if you're doing this because of a medical condition, maybe it's cancer or epilepsy or some sort of medical condition, then higher is going to be better. You want to reach over 3.0 to be in therapeutic ketosis. But if you're doing this for just health and longevity and fat loss, more is not necessarily better. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that too, David.
Yeah, I totally agree. And really, once you start doing this, you really don't need to test. And that's an important thing as well, because you'll feel it. So if you can go long periods of time without food and feel good, have great energy, great mental clarity, then that's a sign you're in fat burning. Because if you're stuck in sugar burning mode, then you're going to have constant cravings. This is one of the big issues that people have. And in fact, I'd like you to go into that. What is the life of somebody that's stuck in sugar burning mode look like? And then what is somebody who's fat adapted? What does that look like?
Yeah, sugar burning mode is not a fun way to live. I lived that way for 20 plus years of my life. And essentially, you're relying on food for energy. That means you're snacking and grazing all day long. If you miss a meal, God forbid, you're going to be unhappy, hungry, and angry. You're not going to be able to focus. Your energy levels are going to drop. The brain is going to panic because glucose is dropping. It'll send the body intense signals to go get more food, especially carbohydrates. And you're just not going to be the fullest version of yourself when you're burning sugar. On top of that, you're going to be storing fat because insulin is going to be high. And if that happens for years, it leads to insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes, which leads to other diseases out there. So it's going to shorten your lifespan when you're a sugar burner. You're going to be relying on food and snacking and grazing. And you're not going to be able to access the stored fat for fuel. And on top of that, you're going to be packing on the worst type of fat in your body, which is the visceral fat, the organ fat, which is like a parasite that creates pressure and around your vital organs, which is not good. When you switch to fat burning metabolism, so getting fat adapted to your point, it's such a better way to live, because now you're not having to rely on snacking and grazing in between meals to keep your energy levels up. Your body is breaking down fat, producing ketones. Those ketones are now feeding the brain so it doesn't panic and tell the body, go get sugar. No, you're totally fine. You could go hours, you could go days without food and still feel at your best. As a matter of fact, I know you know this because you're fat adapted, David. I am too. The longer I fast, the better I feel. And it's because my body is so metabolically flexible. I am fat adapted, and I could choose not to eat anything today. I traveled to Austin 2 days ago and came back, and that entire day, I did not eat anything. I just had water and electrolytes because I didn't want to eat on the plane. I didn't want to eat at the airport, and I had an interview in Austin that I wanted to feel incredible for. So I chose to stay fasted, and I could do that and feel great, actually feel better, because I'm metabolically flexible. I'm fat adapted. If I was a sugar burner and I tried that, my glucose would drop. I would not have been able to do that interview. I would have been fumbling with my words, and I would have just felt awful, right? So we want to transition to fat burning. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a remarkable difference in how you feel when you're burning fat for fuel. And I tell people all the time, like, I rarely when I get hungry, it's actually when I start eating. So I'm usually not going into a meal feeling hungry or having cravings. I eat to maintain my muscle mass, my weight, right? I don't want to lose too much weight, things like that, which is a good problem to have when you don't want to lose too much weight. And so I go into the meal and I'm not hungry. Once I start eating, then my body, my appetite wakes up and it's like, oh, okay, now it's time to eat. Now I've got to get the calories, the key macronutrients and micronutrients that I need. So my appetite's stimulated so I can get the caloric load that I need. And that's the key there. So it is a big difference. And in your book, you talk a lot about this idea of keto flex. Let's go into that. Obviously, that's the title of the book, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't want to just be in a state of ketosis, right? But we actually want to flex in and out of that.
That's exactly right. And that's something you've been teaching for a very long time. And we both love keto. It's a great tool, but it's not the only tool in the shed. To me, David, there are two forms of metabolic inflexibility that I see out there. The first type is what I explained. It's the sugar burning metabolism. 93% of people, they're metabolically inflexible because they're only burning sugar for fuel, nothing else. But in the keto world, which is the world we're a part of, the carnivore fasting keto world, there's another form of metabolic inflexibility, which is where your metabolism only burns fat and ketones for fuel. And they forgot how to burn sugar and carbs. We want a metabolism that goes back and forth without a hiccup. So although we love ketosis, it's fantastic, especially to rebuild somebody's metabolism. It's not something you want to do for the rest of your life. And that's actually good news because you could actually have the flexibility to enjoy yourself and go to an event, go to a wedding, or just feast it up. And I use that word feast versus cheat. It's not a cheat meal, it's a feast meal, it's a flex meal. So the premise behind Keto Flex is to get you from burning sugar to burning fat. Let's get you fat and keto adapted. Let's use ketosis and fasting to do that. Then there comes a point where you've built up this metabolic machinery where we could flex out of ketosis. And I teach you how to do that in the book, depending on your goals, depending on your gender. So there's an entire chapter on how to keto flex, which means going in and out of ketosis for women who have a menstrual cycle, and then a different chapter for women who are postmenopausal, and then a different chapter for men. And then what about diabetics? Like, how should you keto flex if you're diabetic? Should you increase carbohydrates if you're diabetic? Not necessarily. You could increase your caloric load and your protein load. So there's different ways to do this, but a keto flex day is a day where you intentionally do not fast and you do not eat low carb ketosis meals. You actually increase your caloric load, you increase your carbohydrates to around 150 grams of healthy carbs for that day to intentionally get yourself out of ketosis, and then you bounce right back in to maintain metabolic flexibility. And if you don't do this, I've seen a lot of people do long-term ketosis, and what I've seen is that it's too much of a stress for their body to adapt to. And you know about hormesis, which states that you apply stress to a human being. If the human being adapts to the stressor, it's healthier, it's stronger, it's better. But if that stress is too much for the human being to adapt to, you're weaker and you're more inflamed. It's the same principle with ketosis. And what happens is you could see your thyroid could start to, dysfunctions could happen with the thyroid. So reverse T3 could go up, which blocks T3, which is a sign of stress. We could see sex hormone binding globulin go up. I see that a lot, especially in men, which lowers your free testosterone. We could see other sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone go down, and even cortisol go up because it's too much of a stress for the body over time. But by maintaining the Keto Flex or by implementing the Keto Flex, you don't have to worry about that. You get the best of both worlds. You get the benefits of ketosis, but none of the drawbacks of long-term strenuous ketosis, and then that's what keto flexing is.
Yeah, this is really key. So we're creating metabolic adaptation, and really our ultimate goal is resiliency. And so I always say the quality of our life is going to come down to the amount of high functioning mitochondria we have in the cells of our body, and they have to be really adaptable and good at burning fat for fuel. And what we're talking about is basically we're pulsing the body with different types of stressors and creating this level of resilience. So ketosis, when the ketones go up, from an ancestral perspective, that meant a time of famine when food was not very available. And it gave them a survival advantage because those ketones actually make your brain function better. It's like why you fasted before you had that interview when you were traveling, right? You wanted to be working at your best. And so when food is not around, it's actually really important for our brains to be more creative, more innovative, to be able to function at a sharper and higher level. But that can only go on for so long, right? We're going to, at some point, need food. We need fuel. And so, so this is where kind of this coming out of ketosis comes in, and going through a feast-famine cycle, which is what our ancestors did.
That's exactly right. And there's an important caveat here with that feast day, the flex day. When you increase your carbohydrate intake, you lower your fat content, because you do not want to have a day where you have high carbs and high fat. That is essentially the standard American diet. And there's the Randall cycle that will determine which fuel source is being used first. So when you have a high carb, high fat meal, even if it's healthy carbs and high fat, you'll start to metabolize the glucose first. And that's the Randall cycle. And what ends up happening is the fat is not metabolized as quickly, and it actually could pool up in the bloodstream. So it could actually increase triglycerides. In some cases, it could lead to leaky gut and LPS leakage as well. So I talk about that in the book, and I show you the exact macronutrient numbers to hit, how you want to lower the carbs. It could be a high protein day, but not a high fat day when you increase your carbohydrates.
Yeah, for sure. And when I was first teaching the ketogenic diet, I was teaching more of a moderate protein plan. But now I've adapted that over like the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years to a high protein ketogenic diet. Is that what you teach in the Keto Flex?
Same thing, David. I also was really cautious in the beginning about protein, thinking, it'll create gluconeogenesis and kick you out of ketosis. And then I actually started testing it on myself by increasing protein. I didn't see that. And then I had my students test it out. And for the most part, I didn't see that either. And then we now understand the value of protein and essential amino acids and the value of muscle. So just like what you just said, I value, and I talk about this, a higher protein ketogenic approach. And even with the fat, like I also changed my mind on the fat part too, because in the beginning, I do talk about it should be a high fat diet as you lower carbs to get your body familiar with using fatty acids for fuel. But once you're in ketosis, actually have them dial down the fat and replace that with protein, and only get your fat that comes naturally with the protein, like a ribeye or fatty fish or eggs. But the protein is the focus, to your point. I agree.
Yeah, so not adding in extra fat, because early on in the keto diet phase, or I guess you could say craze, right? When people were talking about this, there was a lot of ideas about like using fat bombs and just kind of adding as much fat. And I was guilty of that too. I would tell people, okay, just add extra butter. You can have as much as you want. And what I found is that there are a lot of people out there that struggle with the extra fat, number one, right? Which we can go into. But also I found that they just weren't getting as good of results as you get when you do a high protein, 30 to 50 or more grams of protein in every meal. And then that just creates natural satiation, right? You get that natural satiation. You don't want the extra fat calories coming in. You'll just be satiated in general. And those amino acids are so key for preserving lean body mass, for helping stabilize and keep cortisol down, right? Because that's actually one of the big things people will talk to, like that I'll hear online about fasting, intermittent fasting, right? And also keto, getting into ketosis, people will say, well, won't that spike your cortisol? But if you've got enough protein, that protein is going to help keep more balance with the cortisol. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people who do keto and even fasting, they fall in love with it because it does work. It works amazing. Then you do too much of it, and too much of a good thing ends up being a bad thing, and you need to balance it out. You mentioned the term feast famine, which Dr. Pompa talks about a lot. You got to balance out the famine, which is the fasting, or we could even put ketosis in that category, with the feasting. And I'm guilty of this myself. I fell in love with fasting in 2014, and I did way too much. And it was too much of a cortisol, too much of a stressor for my body to adapt to. And you will see this show up with the way you feel. But if you track things like heart rate variability, you will see it show up with your heart rate variability actually dropping, which is a sign that your nervous system is not adapting to the stressors of your day to day, especially with ketosis and fasting. And then you'll see it maybe with your resting heart rate at night that might go up a little bit. These are signs that your body is not adapting to the stress, and it's time to replenish. It's time to feed. As you mentioned, the body thinks the reason we're in ketosis is because times are tough. We're hardwired for the old school. It doesn't understand that we're doing this because of the benefits of ketosis. It thinks that we need to survive in short term great. The body adapts, there's benefits. That's that hormetic curve. Long term, you lose that hormetic benefit and you start losing the positive results and start actually hurting your body. So there needs to be a balance here of fasting and feasting, and that's where the Keto Flex approach comes in.
Yeah, for sure. And there's going to be a lot of people out there that will say things like, I've tried keto in the past and it didn't work for me. What do you see as far as like the biggest mistakes, and what are some hacks that people can do to get their body into ketosis faster and just more effectively?
The first mistake is not understanding that not all fats on keto are created equal. They're not the same. We know that there are a set of fats out there that are processed, damaged omega-6 fats. They're called vegetable oils and seed oils that are all keto friendly. Every single one of them are keto friendly, yet they're not health friendly. They're going to cause inflammation and oxidation and mitochondrial dysfunction. Yet they might still get you in ketosis, but they're not going to help you feel good. So understanding the quality of the fats are really important. We want to avoid or limit as much as possible these damaged, rancid omega-6 fats, the canola, the soybean, the cottonseed, sunflower, grapeseed oil. When they're processed, these are the bad fats. Instead, when you swap them for healthy fats that are stable, that are minimally processed or not processed at all, maybe cold pressed, like extra virgin olive oil or butter, ghee, coconut oil, beef tallow, these are saturated fats and monounsaturated fats that are more stable. So that simple swap right there, you'll feel a lot better on keto. Not all fats are created equal. The second mistake, you kind of referenced this earlier with not being able to break down fats. That's a liver problem, a liver and a gallbladder problem. And you talk a lot about bitters and bitter-rich foods, and that is an important thing to add in to your keto approach, especially right off the bat, like in the beginning. And I talk about the importance of bitter-rich foods in Keto Flex. We live in a world where so many people have fatty liver, and it's not from alcohol. There's a huge rise in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease where that liver starts to pack on fat, and it's because of all the toxins in our environment, the processed food, high fructose, and even just excess fructose in general. The liver has to process like 90% of that fructose. And now that liver is overwhelmed over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years, and it needs to produce bile that's stored in the gallbladder to break down fat, even quality fat. And if that liver is producing this thick, sluggish bile, as you know, David, you're not going to break down that fat properly, and you're going to feel like crap. You're going to have loose stools. You're going to have diarrhea, maybe even feel nauseous and think, my body can't break down fat. Fat doesn't work for me, and think that it's a fat problem or a keto problem, but it's actually a liver problem and a gallbladder problem. So what you want to do is support the liver. You have a lot of great content on this. Eat more bitter-rich foods. Drink high-quality coffee, which is a bitter. Have apple cider vinegar, lemons and limes, radishes, radicchio, herbs like spices like thyme and basil. These are great things to stimulate that liver to produce bile. Maybe take liver support supplements or do different cleanses for the liver, detox the body. So the liver is the main thing to focus on here. And once you do that, you start producing healthier bile. You start breaking down the fat. So those are the top two mistakes: the wrong fats and not supporting the liver.
Yeah, that's so key. So yeah, you've got to make sure you're supporting that liver. I mean, I really try to get everybody doing that and doing different strategies. I know you do as well. Even if you haven't had issues in the past or you don't have fatty liver, most people have some level of congestion in their bile ducts. And so doing things like apple cider vinegar in water before a meal or drinking coffee, like you said, there are some people that don't respond well to coffee, but most people actually are going to feel better and actually helps support liver function. It's a bitter. So the chlorogenic acid in there, the caffeic acid, those polyphenols are just great for supporting liver function. Arugula, right, which is a low oxalate, bitter vegetable that can be like a base for salads, right? Obviously very low carb. So that's a great one to use as well. Parsley, just, put some parsley or some mint in your eggs or whatever you're eating on your steak. And that can be really helpful as well. So all really, really good strategies that, people definitely should be trying here. Now, let's talk about, we're talking about intermittent fasting a little bit, right? How does this come about? How do you teach people to get started with intermittent fasting as they move into fat burning?
Yeah, fasting. I think you might agree here because you have a lot of amazing content on fasting for so many years. It's probably my favorite tool in the shed. There's really no supplement or biohack or anything out there that could replace, I believe, the healing powers of fasting. It's one of the best ways to harness that innate intelligence and just let your body heal by removing the interference, the food, the digestion. However, you don't go into fasting strategies, especially as you increase the fasting window, as a sugar burner. So the first step, the book has a 4-pillar approach. The first pillar in KetoFlex is called adapt. I almost forgot. Adapt, because you're getting fat adapted. So that takes about 7 to 14 days, where we're taking you from burning sugar to burning fat. That is the first step. I want to get you into fat burning ketosis or close to it before I start having you implement too much fasting. But then once you're there, which takes about 7 to 14 days, then we start going into pillar 2, which is fast, obviously for fasting strategies. So we start really simple. 14-day fast, 14-hour fast, not 14 day. Yeah. 14-hour fast, where let's say you're done eating at 7 p.m. That's your dinner, last bite of food, 7 p.m. You go to bed, and then you wake up and wait until 9 a.m. to have your breakfast. That's a 14-hour fast. We start there. You feel good. Do that for a few days. Then we bump it up to a 16-hour fast, and then an 18-hour fast. But the key is to continuously change up the routine for the fast so the body keeps adapting. And then eventually, as you move into pillar 3 and pillar 4, we start throwing in a 24-hour fast. And then in some cases, depending on your goal, there's a 48-hour fast. So that's where we start. We first get you fat adapted. Then we start building up that fasting window. It's like a muscle. And then we start changing that fasting schedule so your body is not getting familiar and hitting a plateau. It'll constantly force adaptation, and that's where the magic happens. And I love fasting. I know you do as well. It's incredible for gut health. It's incredible for brain health. It's incredible for the autophagy, the cellular cleanup process, insulin resistance. I could go on and on about what fasting can do inside the body, but fasting is like a chainsaw. If you buy a chainsaw and you skip reading the user manual and you just start wielding it all around, you could hurt yourself. Same thing with fasting. You got to read the user manual. You have to know what you're doing. And once you understand that chainsaw, the fast, could be such a powerful tool to get amazing results in your health.
For sure. And as you start doing this, it really becomes intuitive, because you get this natural appetite suppression effect as you're getting more and more fat, just better at burning fat. And so you're not as hungry in the morning. And I always tell people, start your day with water, right? Start your day by just hydrating in the morning. By doing that, you're going to suppress your hunger hormone ghrelin in your stomach, and you're going to have natural satiation. Oftentimes, it's pretty easy for people to go till 9 or 10 a.m. And, over time, you probably hear this all the time too, Ben. People are just like, I'm not hungry, so I just wait until, my lunch break, right? And this is kind of how you can naturally get into, an intermittent fasted state where you're starting to tighten that window. And for a lot of people, they're doing early time restricted feeding, right? Which has great benefits as well. And so you talk about that in the book, like how to kind of shift your window around.
I do. And a few years ago, my answer would not be the answer it is today. I actually thought breakfast was the dumbest meal of the day. Never have breakfast. It's like only have lunch and dinner. That's going to be the best. That's what I would follow personally as well. I have shifted my tune on that. I've changed my tune on that. So I think early time restricted feeding is actually more beneficial, and I'll give some reasons why. Your insulin levels are more sensitive. You're more insulin sensitive in the morning than you are later on in the day. As the day goes by, every organ has this circadian clock, including your pancreas, including your liver. So what happens is the same meal. Let's say you had dinner at 9 a.m. That same meal at dinner at 9 p.m., that same meal at 9 a.m. is completely different inside of the body. It could be the same exact meal, same exact macros and calories, but when having it at 9 p.m., you will get a more exaggerated glucose and insulin response than having it in the morning at 9 a.m. That's because you're more insulin sensitive in the morning versus nighttime. And there was a study that really helped me understand this better. I talk about it in KetoFlex. So it was Dr. Courtney Peterson from University of Alabama, Birmingham. And in this study, she took a group of participants in the study where everything was controlled in a lab. And what they did was one group had followed early time restricted feeding. So they ate between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. So they had they had breakfast and lunch, but they skipped dinner. The other group did time restricted feeding, same time fasted, but they skipped breakfast and had lunch and dinner and ate between 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. And then they tracked different metrics, insulin, glucose, but they also tracked autophagy, which is really hard to track, but they did it in the lab looking at the LC3A protein. And then they also tracked their sirtuin genes, which are their longevity genes, their SIRT1 genes. And what they found was that the group that was eating breakfast and lunch and skipping dinner versus the other group had 22% more autophagy activated and 10% more of their sirtuins activated. And it made sense because we're designed to have most of our calories during the day. Now, I have to say this because I know this and I believe it's so much better to have breakfast and lunch and skip dinner, yet I don't follow that myself. And I don't think you do as well, because my mornings are when I do research, I do book writing, I do content, and I actually feel better fasted than with the breakfast. So I don't follow that, even though I recommend it, just to give you an idea here. But I have my meals between usually 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. That's my window because it works better for my schedule. And I think you're the same way, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it from time to time, but for the most part, I'm eating between, my meals are typically between like 1:30 and 6:30, 1:30 and 7, somewhere around there. So yeah, from a social perspective, it can be really hard. When I do my 24-hour fast, again, it depends on my schedule, but my preferred way to do it is a lunch to lunch fast, as opposed to like a dinner to dinner fast. Although, again, depending on schedule, sometimes I do a dinner to dinner. But that is my preferred way to do it. I do feel like I sleep better. Like if I stop eating at 2 p.m., I just feel like the next morning I feel like $1,000,000. Like I always feel good, but it's like I just feel like instead of a 10 out of 10, I feel like a 15 out of 10, right? And so it really, really helps. So if you're able to implement that into your schedule, I think that's a great approach, that early time restricted feeding approach. So
yeah,
and good research like you were talking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the research. The bottom line is this: the earlier you could stop eating, the better it's going to be for you. It doesn't have to be as early as we're talking about here, but at least no food 3 hours before bed as like the bare minimum. I call it the kitchen is closed rule, like no food 3 hours before bed. If you could push that to 4 hours or 5 hours, you're going to notice more benefits like David's talking about. When he wakes up in the morning, he feels even better. Same thing. And I look at my stats and I track that with my Oura Ring, and it's significantly better the longer I fast before bed. I see my HRV go up. I see my resting heart rate go down. I see my deep and REM sleep bump up. And these are very important for rest, recovery, fat loss, longevity. So the bottom line is the earlier you could have your meals, the better. It doesn't have to be as maybe extreme as it might sound to some people, but no food at least 3 hours before bed, and bring in even earlier, you're going to get even more benefits.
Yeah, as your insulin goes down, so with lower insulin, your body's going to produce more growth hormone when you have higher melatonin at night while you're sleeping, ideally in as dark a room as possible. You're blocking blue light in the evening, probably a lot of the things you talk about in the book. I know you do in your videos. You're going to have higher growth hormone. And growth hormone is that quintessential anti-aging hormone that helps you burn fat, build lean body mass, bone, muscle. Also great for the immune system, helps balance the immune system, reduce inflammation in the body. So you want to optimize that growth hormone release at night. If you're eating right before you go to bed, you're going to raise insulin. You're also going to just put a lot of stress on your gut, and that's going to lower both melatonin and your growth hormone release.
That is the most important window for fat loss right there that you explained. Not the hour in the gym, not even your fasting window. If you're looking for some fat loss, it's that window where you pulse the growth hormone like you just referenced. It's the 2 to 3 to 4 hours after you've fallen asleep, typically between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Yeah. And if you're eating too close to bed, to your point, David, you spike insulin, it stays elevated for hours, and it suppresses melatonin, suppresses growth hormone. So by the time insulin drops, you've already missed that entire window of delta sleep, and you're already in your REM stages of sleep, which is also beneficial. But for fat loss, it's that growth hormone pulse. It's that first half of sleep, and you can miss that entire window and be training your butt off, doing caloric restriction, even fasting. But if you miss that window, you're not going to get the fat loss results that you want.
For sure. And as that food sits there, like if you eat right before you go to bed, and especially if you're eating, standard American diet, that food is just sitting there in your stomach and it's not going to release into your small intestine for a bit. So that's going to increase reflux, right? Which is going to interrupt your sleep. You might end up feeling like you're waking up often throughout the night. Plus, it's actually like a breeding ground for bad bacteria like H. pylori in your stomach to overgrow. In fact, that's actually one of the biggest things. H. pylori is, it's associated with stomach cancer, acid reflux, and it's a very, very common infection. One of the number one risk factors, and this is even for healthy people, is when they eat late at night and the food just sits there in their stomach. Because now you have food, and H. pylori is one of the few bacteria that can survive in the stomach, and they just have like a party, right? Because the food's just sitting there, it's not moving. So, and that's actually one of the reasons why when people don't have a good response on, let's say, a higher protein diet or, a low carb ketogenic style diet, oftentimes they actually have an H. pylori infection that needs to be addressed. Are you seeing that as well?
I am. And it's just a bad idea to have food right before bed. It's gonna do a lot of bad things in your body. It's one of the most important things you can do. If there's one action step you take from this interview, let it be that, like no food at least 3 hours before bed, because not just the H. pylori thing, but it takes a lot of energy to digest food. And there's so many amazing processes that happen during quality sleep. I mentioned the growth hormone post, you mentioned melatonin, we mentioned the fat loss benefits, but it's way more than that. Your brain is shrinking temporarily in size, and then you have this cerebral spinal fluid flushing over the brain, collecting toxins and plaques and proteins, flushing it out. These are things that can accumulate over time and create Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's. So your body has this dishwasher fluid flushing over, getting rid of the junk if you're getting quality sleep. You also have your body just repairing itself from the stressors of the day, whether it's a workout or whatever stressors you put during that day, your body's repairing it overnight. You have short-term memory from the day that's being consolidated for long-term memory. So that's helping with brain function and mental health. And if you don't get enough of that, you're going to struggle to remember people's name. You're going to deal with brain fog. You're going to have challenges with mental fatigue. Sleep is the Swiss Army knife of health. And you could do all the right things during the day, but eat too close to bedtime, and you just destroy a lot of those benefits. And there's a story I actually share in Keto Flex that's relevant to this, where a client of mine, this is back in like 2015, 2016, a client of mine hired me, and he was about 100 pounds overweight. He had sleep issues. He was wearing a sleep apnea machine. He was a pure sugar burner. He was pre-diabetic, high blood pressure, and he had a full-time job, a wife and a kid, so a lot of stress. And right before he hired me, about a few weeks before that, he ended up signing up for a gym membership. And what he did with the gym membership is he would do the 5 a.m. class. So he would actually sacrifice sleep, maybe shave off about 2 hours to wake up, feel good about waking up, being disciplined, going to the gym. He'd work out, but he'd lose out on some sleep as a result. And he felt frustrated because he didn't notice any difference. And what I told this individual, I said, look, right now, we actually need you to be, we need to send a signal that you're safe, and we need to actually work on sleep recovery before we start adding in exercise. So I actually told him to pause his gym membership, don't wake up so early, let's fix some things with your sleep, like moving the dinner down, and stay asleep to get that extra hour and a half of sleep. And then later on, we'll bring in the exercise. And just by doing that, he started to lose weight. He started to have more energy. And then eventually he got off his sleep apnea machine. He lost about 70 pounds in just, I think, 6 months. And he had more energy. A lot of people think it's about the exercise, but for this guy and for a lot of people, it was about fixing the sleep first. When you do that, that's where the magic happens. And the frustrating part, though, is that sleep is not sexy to talk about. It's not like you know, going to a workout and crushing a CrossFit workout or Orange Theory, that's cool to kind of brag about. But to say like, yeah, I got 8 hours of quality sleep last night, 90 minutes of REM, 90 minutes of deep, like it's not something most people want to brag about. They want to brag about the workout, but it's the sleep that's going to get you most of your benefits. Yeah,
it kind of goes against that grind culture, right, that we're in, where, you know, we think we're a hero if we get up and do these 5 a.m. classes. But, you know, I always say the two biggest deficiencies we have in our society are sunlight and darkness, right? Most people are not getting out in the sun, getting good quality sun exposure on a regular basis, and they're not getting enough darkness, right? And that darkness doesn't mean you have to be asleep. It could mean that you just have all the lights in your house dimmed. So you've got blue light blocking glasses on after dark. you're prioritizing getting exposure to that darkness, which is going to set you up for melatonin, growth hormone, and all the great benefits of sleep. That's why I've never been a big fan of those 5 a.m. exercise classes. I tell people, get the sleep that you need, take a 10-minute, 15-minute break, and just go for a walk in the middle of the day in the sun. Like you and I are big advocates of resistance training, but I would take that. If somebody had a super busy schedule, I would take 10 to 15 minutes. If they could just get 15 minutes, I would have them go outside, start by taking a walk. Maybe we can implement, as they get healthier, a little bit of HIIT training or just doing push-ups outside, right? Ideally, like taking off their shirt, trying to get as much good sun exposure on their body as possible, and also prioritizing that sleep at night as opposed to getting up for the 5 a.m., 6 a.m. class. And I've had a lot of people, you probably get this too. Like people will come up to me. I have friends that come up and they're like, yeah, I've been doing the 5 a.m. class or the 6 a.m. class. And I'm like, really? Like, how are you feeling with that? They're like, oh man, I feel so amazing doing it. I'm like, problem you're going to have is going to be the sustainability, and I'm like, if there's a way that you can get that exercise in at a different time, I think it would be advantageous.
I agree with you. And you think about it, they're actually waking up before the sunrise and they're getting a hefty dose of artificial light at the workout. Yeah. It's like, that's not ideal. It's really not. And then to your point with the darkness deficiency, I agree. At night, we have the phone, we have the TV, we have all the light bulbs in our house. And what I did in my bedroom is I bought these red light plugins. So there's one that sits on my nightstand that's a red light lamp. And then in my bathroom, there are 2 like night lights that are red light. And I don't have to turn on my lights at night. I just turn those on. So you're able to see, but you're also not getting that cortisol spike from the blue light. And these are not expensive. They're just plugins, nightstand and in the bathroom. So if you wake up at like 3 a.m. to use the restroom, you're not turning on the light. Those plugins are lighting up the bathroom in red, but that red is not spiking cortisol. So there's things you can do there to avoid the artificial light that we get at nighttime.
Yeah, that's key. I just have my eye mask on and I like have memorized my route, right? So I just kind of use my hand, memorize my route. So I never even open my eyes, right?
I love
That's
it.
ideal if you can do it.
Yeah, I love that. I use my eye mask as well. For me, so I have 2 dogs, and sometimes my dog will wake me up like 2 a.m. to like go outside. I'm like, no. So I put on the blue light blocking glasses, then walk outside, let him do his thing, and then walk back. But by putting the glasses on, it helps to kind of prevent that cortisol spike.
Just wait till you have kids, right?
Oh,
Especially
yes.
young kids.
Yes. That's the next one.
And this is big because sleep is so critical. When I had my twins, this is 10 years ago, I was working out 6 days a week, lifting weights. And I thought, I got twins, like we're waking up in the middle of the night. I just didn't want to change my schedule. I'm like, I like how I feel when I work out. And I completely overtrained my body. I had to drop it back. So I dropped it back to like 3 or 4 resistance training days because my body was just in sympathetic overload, so overstressed. So I would have just tremendous brain fog and fatigue. And so this is where you gotta, again, these hormetic stressors like exercise, you can easily overdo it if you're not optimizing recovery and sleep.
Yeah, and I believe, the older I'm getting, age-wise, I don't need more training. I just need to do it more smarter versus harder. So I used to be able to get away with those 5 to 6 workouts a week as well, like you referenced. But for me, 3 strength training workouts a week, 45 minutes each, that's enough for me. And I supplement that with, of course, like basketball and some cardio and, of course, walking every single day. And that's working way better for me than if I did 5 or 6 workouts a week right now at my age.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to look out for the signs that you are overtraining. In the health space, I see it all the time. I used to see it when I was a personal trainer. You probably did as well. Like I would just see people they were there for an hour and a half every single day in the gym. And for many of them, they just didn't look happy that they were there. And this is the issue with overtraining is like you're doing it because you just feel like this is what you have to do, but it almost becomes a chore, And so it's not that like for a lot of people, we don't necessarily enjoy the pain of the exercise. We enjoy the results, but you should really feel those results and you should feel energized. You should feel, really, really good. And for most people, they're not optimizing the recovery phase, the sleep, right? And there's all kinds of tools like red light therapy, things like that can help enhance the recovery. So you want to train hard, but then you also want optimized recovery, And that's key. And not eating late before you go to bed, so you can optimize growth hormone
That's right.
and melatonin. Yeah.
That's right. That's probably one of the most important things. And just to add to your point here, a lot of people are at the gym for an hour, hour and a half because they're looking to burn off the calories. They're looking at it as an equation, right? Like, all right, I did this workout, I burned 700 calories. Now I could get away with having 700 calories of like ice cream. So they look at it as a way. That's not how the body works, though. And also, if you're looking at how many calories you're burning during a workout, it's not accurate, because here's a news flash for you. If you're wearing a heart rate strap or whatever it is, and it says you did a workout and you burned 733 calories. No, you did not burn 733 calories. If you just sat on your butt for that hour, your metabolism was already using calories. Maybe it was like 500, and you actually burned like 150 calories, not the amount you see on your watch or your device. So just keep in mind, it's not what you think, and it's not about the calories. It's about metabolic flexibility.
And that's one of the keys you talk about in the book as well, because a lot of people think, okay, well, I've got to go on this calorie restricted diet in order to achieve my goals and then get the amount of exercise I need. So I'm in a calorie deficit, and I want to be in let's say a 500 calorie deficit each day in order to get to the 3,500, which is equivalent to a pound, right? So like, it's like this math formula. To burn a pound every single day or every week, you gotta burn 3,500 more calories than you gotta burn more than you take in. And so they're trying to figure out this math equation, but what we know today is it's really more about the hormones.
100%. The premise is wrong. When we focus on calories, you're focusing on the symptom, meaning nobody has a weight problem. I talk about this in the book. It's a weight symptom. There's a philosophy out there that most dietitians and doctors and personal trainers follow, which is the calories in versus calories out approach. And they believe that in order for you to get results, we need you to lose weight so you can be healthy. That's not how the body works. We don't lose weight to get healthy. We get healthy to lose weight. By focusing on calories, you're focusing on a distraction. And the problem is that the approach you just mentioned, okay, you're in a 3,500 calorie deficit every single week. That's a pound of fat. And the problem is that it does work for most people in the beginning. Absolutely. You're going to lose some weight, but you could only cut your calories so much that the metabolism will adapt in a negative way. Now, all of a sudden, your resting metabolic rate has crashed by 10, 20, 30% or even higher. And then it's harder to lose the weight. What are you going to do? Cut some more? Cut the calories some more? Yeah, some people do that, but you could only keep doing that until you are not eating nothing. And that's not going to work. There's a much better way. And there's a friend of mine who actually, his name is Chris, and he built my studio here. And back in December, a few months ago, he came to me and he was very much overweight. And he's like, I don't understand. I'm doing one meal a day. I'm in a calorie deficit. I've been doing this for years. Yet I have all this extra weight, like over 100 pounds of fat. And you know what I did with him? I tripled his caloric intake. I had him stop fasting. His body was in complete starvation mode before, was in danger mode. I tripled its caloric load. I stopped him from fasting. He started eating 3 meals a day. He lost 70 pounds in the last few months. How do you explain that to people who follow calories in versus calories out? We tripled his caloric load and the weight came off, because it's not about calories. It's about the signals you're giving your body. So we need to detach from the old dogma that a calorie is a calorie. It's not. It's the metabolic response from that calorie, from those calories, that actually matter.
Yeah, that's so critical. Now, there's a lot of people out there that, again, will talk about cortisol and issues with cortisol, right? Especially with like fasting, or one of the popular approaches out there is you need to eat like 5 meals a day every 3 to 4 hours, right? High protein every 3 to 4 hours in order to keep cortisol balanced. Okay. And so what are your top strategies? Obviously, you're not teaching that. What are your top strategies for helping keep cortisol balanced?
Not eating 5 meals a day, I'll tell you that. Sleep and recovery is the main thing we talked about. If you're getting enough quality sleep, which is going to be recovery as well, you don't really have to worry about that so much. And looking at heart rate variability, to me, is one of the best things you can do, because it'll show you if the stressors you have is too much. It's a cortisol issue. And it's not the cortisol that's the issue. That's like saying you should never exercise because it's a stress to the body. Like, no, it's not the exercise. It's if you're not adapting to it. That's the problem. It's the same thing with fasting. It's the same thing with all these biohacks. It's not the stressor. By telling somebody to eat 5 meals a day to taper down cortisol, it's actually making them weaker and less resilient. That's like saying, don't ever exercise because it's too stressful. Like, just sit on the couch all day till we could keep cortisol low. Like, that's not helping the person. So it's not about removing stressors per se. It's about making this hormetic ceiling higher so you're more resilient to the stressors. And it starts with the sleep. Now, other things you can do is nostril breathing, breathing through your nose. We live in a world where we have chronic mouth breathers out there. If you're not talking or exercising, you got to be breathing through your nose. Be conscious about that. So I'm always aware about that. And then at night, I wear mouth tape that forces me to breathe through my nose at night. My favorite way to lower cortisol is with vitamin G. Vitamin G is proven to raise oxytocin, lower cortisol. It's great for mitochondrial function. It's great for the immune system. And, vitamin G, as you know, David, is gratitude. It's the feeling of gratitude. It's the best way to lower stress, and you get an immediate benefit. You can't overdo it. There's no toxicity limit on vitamin G. It's free. And I know it sounds woo-woo and silly to some people, but actually it works. When you feel the gratitude, it's one of the best things you can do for stress and cortisol. So when you find yourself stressed out, close your eyes and think of something that you're grateful for and live in that gratitude for a minute and then watch what it does for your stress levels, your HRV, your sleep, your recovery. So those are a few tools that I use for cortisol.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. And then the other vitamin G, get out and ground your body. Get on grass, dirt, sand. That helps basically shower your electromagnetic field, helps reconnect you to nature, and that will also help with cortisol as well. Yeah, a lot of people just get too, I think they just get too into the hype about cortisol with fasting. And they're not thinking about all the other ways that their stress hormones are being activated and other things that are pushing their sympathetic activation. But also, you've got to make sure you're eating enough protein when you are eating. And then also electrolytes. Good salts, electrolytes are so key. Most people don't realize that, when you're on a lower carb diet, you're actually depleting, you're actually excreting more salt and water. And so you need to hydrate. And when your sodium levels go down in your bloodstream, cortisol goes up to help hold on to salt. And so oftentimes it's a dehydration or an electrolyte deficiency that's ending up pushing the body into more of a sympathetic activation. So hydrating well, getting the right salts is also really key.
Yeah, good point, especially in the beginning as you're transitioning from sugar burning to fat burn. That's the most important time to get those electrolytes up.
Yeah, so key. Well, guys, the book is Keto Flex, 4 Secrets to Reduce Inflammation, Burn Fat, and Reboot Your Metabolism. You can check it out at ketoflexbook.com. And do you have any special giveaways or anything like that people can get at the website?
Yeah, I do. And thank you for allowing me to share that. If you read the old version of Keto Flex, this is a brand new revised version, by the way. This is being published with Hay House July 21st. It's completely brand new. It's about 75% revised from the old version. And we're giving away a ton of free bonuses for anybody who goes to that website David referenced, which is ketoflexbook.com. There's PDFs, there's audio downloads. There's a ton of stuff there. You could see it. The book is going to be available on paperback, Kindle, and if you prefer to listen to books like I do, I also recorded, I narrated the entire audiobook, and it's going to be available on Audible and Spotify. And at the end of every chapter for the audio, there are some coaching sessions that are exclusive to the audiobook. So if you prefer that, any of those formats will get you the bonuses. So it's ketoflexbook.com.
Awesome. Well, Ben, great work. Once again, guys, check out the book again, ketoflexbook.com. And Ben, always enjoy our conversations. And thanks for all the value that you added to our listeners here today.
Always inspired by you, my friend. Thanks for being a great friend and a mentor. Thanks for having me back, David.
Absolutely. All right. God bless you. God bless all our listeners. And we'll see you guys on a future podcast.